Congresswoman Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez, thank you for the opportunity to interview you today. We are Thursday, March 20th, so thanks for being here.
Glad to be here. Thanks for coming by.
Absolutely. You've been holding town halls in your district since the start of the new congressional session. Given all the changes to the federal cuts, the federal programs, what are constituents telling you? And have you noticed a difference in the tone of your town halls?
Yeah, so I've held 13 town halls in all 7 counties, and January was definitely, so it was a little bit, that one was a little difficult because we have to go through House ethics and the lawyers are very strict about what contracts we can use, so we had a venue fall through and ended up with a much smaller room, which was really frustrating to constituents who had wanted to be in the room for the town hall. But you know, it really varies where you are. I held one last week in Pacific County, and there, you know, it continues to be stuff about invasive European green crab, you know, concerns about NOAA budget cuts, how that might impact buoy operations. In Vancouver, it's a little more of a, I'd say a little more of a political crowd. You know, concerns about all of the executive orders coming down. So it varies by place, and I think that's part of the reason that it's really important to me to show up everywhere and hear from the biggest swath of my community that I can, not just folks who are in an urban core, but all across the district, to get the most representative sample I can of what people are thinking about and worried about and what's keeping them up.
What are constituents asking you to focus on in D.C. right now?
You know, it depends. I think that for a lot of my neighbors, their experience with the world has not changed that much. You know, they still can't afford rent. People are still working 3 jobs. People are still struggling to pay for their groceries. I think that a lot of folks are also really concerned about the path of this administration, the balance of power between, you know, the executive, the legislative, and our branch, and it's really important to them that they are that our system of rules is being followed, and that their voices are being heard.
We are talking on Thursday again. President Trump will sign an executive order today aimed at dismantling the Federal Department of Education. Congress, of course, will ultimately have the say in that, but Trump basically gutting that department. Give me your thoughts on that.
Well, it is really critical that we are investing in our youngest Americans. I've seen data that we, you know, it's something like for every $30 we spend on Americans over 65, we spend 1 on Americans under 18. And, you know, a lot of my counties have had significant budget shortfalls. Skamania County was down $800,000. Wahkiakum County just went down to a 4-day school week because of falling revenue. And that has real impacts on student outcomes and the experience. You know, often the first programs to get cut are things like shop class and choir and things that really drive a lot of student engagement and a sense of their talents being honored and valued in the system. And so it's really important that Congress is exercising their authority and how these administrations that Congress established are exercising and providing value to Americans. But I think it's really important that we are not gaslighting people and that we are affirming the experience. Like, we want our schools to work better. We want, you know, we want the IRS to work better. We want the VA to work better. I read a book that was talking about if you wrote out the system for how the VA processes information, it is 8 feet tall and 20 feet long. And a lot of that is in 12-point font. And no one would design a program like that. And what we've seen from legislators for decades is just slapping on more report language and more hoops to jump through. And from this administration, I think we've seen them doing a good job of amplifying and echoing the sentiment that we want a better system, but they're just scapegoating civil servants. And that doesn't make a machine that works better. That is our job. That is what our branch should be focused on. And I hope that the president will work with us to actually create the substantive reforms to make these machines work better, not just randomly pulling out flywheels and stripping bolts.
So you don't mind the Trump folks looking at the Department of Education, right? But
No.
it's what may come out of it. Is that what you're concerned about?
And it's important that we are providing things that are substantially improving the process, not just, slashing and burning and making, some kind of vengeance statement, but that we are making a more efficient system.
Social Security recipients and applicants may soon have to visit an office to confirm their identities rather than interact with the agency over the phone. They're concerned about fraud in that department. There's a way to do it online, but that doesn't work for everybody, of course. Is this an issue you're hearing about from your constituents, Social Security?
Absolutely. I get my radio from an internet tower, and this is one of the frustrations I have with people in DC, is it feels like they all think that that America is just like them. A lot of those people, they have multiple degrees and they're under 40 and they're in the highest income bracket. That is not what the country looks like. That is not what my community looks like. And trying to shoehorn us into a system that and put in these barriers to the dollars that people have earned, and undermining the dignity of their retirement, of their access to care, it makes me sick.
We've heard a lot about possible cuts to Medicaid as well. What does the future look like for that?
Yeah, that is a major reason that I voted on the House reconciliation against the House reconciliation bill, because the math doesn't math unless they're really going to gut these programs that people rely on. And a lot of folks who are relying on them, they don't have the luxury of spending a lot of time reading about the legislative process coming down. And I am really concerned that their voices aren't being heard. I did a roundtable recently at the Clark County Correctional Facility at their jail. And I don't know if you know this, but corrections officers' life expectancy is only 59 years old. They have one of the highest suicide rates in any occupation. And I was holding this roundtable with them, and I had to ask them like 5 times, what do you need? And they kept telling me what their detainees need. And they kept pointing to when they shut the beds at Western State Hospital, when there was more untreated mental health in our county and in our community, they're the ones left holding the bags. They're the ones who get ejaculated on or have to deal with people in just crisis repeatedly. And it's really important that we recognize these cuts hurt everyone. They hurt all of us. Yes, we need to be fighting for the people on Medicaid, but we also need to be in Medicare, but we also need to be recognizing that nothing happens in a vacuum.
What kind of federal job losses are you seeing in your district due to the DOJ Trump cuts?
Yeah, it is pretty galling. A lot of people in our community, their grandparents fought and great-grandparents fought and died to have a public power system here. The BPA is not funded through federal dollars. It is funded, it is self-funded. It's funded by ratepayers. And to see the slashes to their workforce, it is the classic example of being, penny wise and pound foolish. It is a terrible financial mistake. And although many of those jobs, they've brought those jobs back, think about how disrespected you would feel to be so told that you're not necessary, that you're not a linchpin of how people have lights, people are able to run their medical equipment, people have reliable power. It's demoralizing and it's corrosive and it's wrong. And I think it's also a mistake to make this about an alphabet soup of federal agencies and not look at it at the human scale of the families that have really been kneecapped by this recklessness. We don't get more efficient machines by just, scapegoating civil servants.
I understand you've contacted the Trump administration about reinstating employees needed for wildfires and timber harvest. How confident are you those employees will get their jobs back?
For a lot of these roles, there is a very high demand for that skill set. And, one of the reasons that people take jobs in a federal agency is because it's, considered to be like often predictable and a reliable job, and you know, you build a community with your colleagues. But when that rug is pulled out from under people, I worry that people will go, you know, to the private sector. I worry that these national assets, our timberlands, will be so devalued by this kind of corrosive policy that, like, what we're going to sell public water systems to Nestle? Like, is that a good deal for us? It's not. And people's even their ability to go and contact those employees again has been really unstable and unpredictable.
I want to ask you about that because recent town hall, you said there's been some background noise about people trying to sell our public power systems to the highest bidder. You were referring to the Bonneville Power Administration, and you said, this is your quote, "like hell no over my dead body." Also said there's serious public sentiment and demand for efficiency in government systems. How do you balance the desire for a slimmed down federal government without massive federal job cuts or selling off these public systems?
Yeah, it would be a profound mistake. And so one of the kind of wild things about my life now is that I pay a power bill at home in Skamania County and also in DC. And we are so fortunate here to have reliable, clean power. 80% of the electricity I use in Washington, DC is generated by coal, you know, and the rates are just substantially higher there. And I think when you talk to a lot of these civil servants, they are the first ones to point out the inefficiencies and the Byzantine nature of the hoops they have to jump through. A lot of these folks are the best positioned to help us create a more efficient process. And so working with them, particularly around permitting reform, that is a huge issue. How difficult it is to get our public infrastructure programs built, how quickly they can be and easily they can be tied up in litigation for, you know, a generation. So creating a more efficient permitting system, I think there's a lot of value and a lot of savings that can be delivered to taxpayers right there. That's one thing I've been looking at. You know, and that goes down through so many agencies that a lot of these programs, you know, it's like a dog pile. And I saw it as a small business owner how difficult it is to interface with any agency, state or local. You know, you can never tell what they're asking you on the form, you know, and there's been, I think, my understanding is that a lot of the user research that's necessary is functionally illegal. There are so many rules around how these agencies interact with the users of the system that, like, they've made it impossible to do some of the work to, like, understand what the question is the IRS is asking you, and just speaking in plain language. So that kind of legislative reform, I think, will deliver a lot of savings. And we're not going to sacrifice our public resources to do that. We're not going to cut off our nose to spite our face. We have to know what is worth having in this country and fight for that, and not get wrapped around the axle as a defender of the status quo, but as people who know that we've got a good thing and it's worth fighting for.
Overall, what do you think about the DOGE cuts? Is there anything you look at and you go, okay, I go along with that? I want an efficient government, but I'm just seeing kind of this similar lip service to efficiency without the real, without really empowering people to just do their job. Like, when I talk to educators, they're like, just let me teach. Why do I have to spend so much time proving that I'm teaching and not actually just teaching? And to me, it conveys a real disrespect for the people who are actually the boots on the ground doing the work that makes our country great. We've got to stay focused on empowering people in work boots and not just the people with spreadsheets and clipboards. And it feels like a lot of this, like, pedigreed dog boy thing is like, it's just people with sterling resumes who don't know what they're talking about. According to the Constitution, the congressional members have the power of the purse, which of course means they allocate the money. But DOGE is cutting some federal programs, even though money has been approved for them. Do you believe what's taking place right now will impact congressional control in the future?
A lot of that is being worked out in the courts right now, and it is really important that we maintain an equal balance of authority. We are equal branches with the legislative branch. And so I think that their job is to litigate. Lawfare is not politics, right? Like, politics is like reflecting and building community sentiment, reflecting the priorities and the values of your community in the legislative process in DC. And that's why it's so important that we maintain control of our federal dollars and where they're being spent and exercise more control. That's one of the reasons that I fought to be on appropriations committees, because I felt like I wanted to see more resources and more investment in the nuts and bolts of good governance, you know? I think, you know, these public infrastructure programs, permitting reform, public education, getting shop class in junior high, like, that's what I want to look to fund. Like, that's what I want to work towards. I don't know very many of my neighbors that would have agreed with a lot of the programs that have been cut. Like, I don't know, teaching Serbian journalists to use like gender inclusive language. You know, our schools don't have air conditioning in them. Yeah. We have real problems that we need to be investing in, but the way that they're doing it and the disregard for the actual boots on the ground here, our teachers, our linemen, our wildland firefighters, like, that's what is most troubling and sickening to me.
What are you hearing from your district when it comes to the Trump tariffs and then the retaliatory tariffs as well? What are they saying about it?
Well, you know, in timber communities, there has been concerns about, you know, dumping lumber. But I think we all want domestic manufacturing, right? We want to make things in this country. I own a machine shop. I know that you don't just flip a switch and get American-made goods. And it takes time. You have to keep a long view of how you build something worth having. And I worry that a lot of these tariffs could end up being just, you know, backdoor sweetheart deals for multinationals and not doing the task at hand, which is rebuilding domestic manufacturing, making things in this country where people are able to raise a family and own a home on a single income again. Like, that's what we want. And so I think it's important that we are not just thinking kind of defensively in this administration, but thinking offensively about what is the thing that we want at the end of the day. Like, what is the thing that we want and how do we get there? It is not just about, you know, reflexively resisting everything that's coming. It's about saying, where does this align with my community? What do we want? How do we get there? What are the best and what are the kind of common denominators of values that we share? And how do we give the biggest voice to those and create the best chance to deliver durable reforms?
Do you think that tariffs will eventually be beneficial once they settle in?
I mean, It changes every 10 minutes on Twitter. Like, it's crazy. And, you know, my district has the highest number of ports west of the Mississippi. And I remind my colleagues in North Dakota all the time, like, their grain comes down my ports. And I was talking to some folks from our ports last week, and I was like, you have to keep your eye on the horizon here. Like, the long work of building something durable, and not just a reactionary kind of strategy about everything you see on Twitter, because it's going to change in 10 minutes anyways. Mm-hmm. Having a clear orientation on what we want, growing food in this country, being able to afford things that matter in life, like spending time with your family, those are the things that we need to be focused on.
In a White House fact sheet, President Trump said he was imposing tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China because of the extraordinary threat posed by illegal aliens and drugs, including deadly fentanyl. In a previous interview on this program, you spoke about the devastating impact that fentanyl is having in your district. You were critical of the Biden administration at the time and its, quote, lack of urgency about securing the border. Do you agree with what the Trump administration is doing to secure the border now?
Well, it remains true that, like, fentanyl is a profound crisis here. And it feels like we've been ignored because, it's not the family of, a lot of DC politics that are addicted to fentanyl. And I think a core part of my job is reflecting the experience and the priorities of my community, right? And so saying that loudly, I think it is really critical. It is a critical role that we have operational control of our borders and we know who and what is coming in and out. But I do worry that it's like, I have concerns that, running roughshod over our system of checks and balances is also very corrosive. And so, a lot of the stuff is playing out in courts. It is quite fluid. And I think it's about maintaining a positive policy agenda about all of the things that we can do to counter fentanyl. Yes, interdiction is really important. It's also really important that young people feel like they have a shot at having a life worth having, that there's a real reality and a real future they see for themselves where they can own a business, own a home, raise a family, that they have something worth going for. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to rebuild the community values and the agency and power of people in the middle class in our country. But stopping the flow of fentanyl is really important.
Only been 2 months. Do you believe there's been a decrease in fentanyl in your district at this point, or is it still early to tell?
Well, there was actually a really big bust in British Columbia, and that work is really important, and that was a really, I always think, like, how many lives did that just save? The work that law enforcement is doing. I'm also hearing from law enforcement that, like, they also need agency. They need the tools to be able to work across jurisdictions. And some of those programs have been proposed to have drastic cuts to them under this administration. And so fighting to ensure that programs that are working are funded here at home, and that we're not walking away from our belief in a system of checks and balance and adherence to the Constitution.
You were one of 46 Democrats to vote in favor of the Laken-Riley Act, which requires the federal detention of unauthorized immigrants accused of theft and violent crimes. Now, critics of that bill say it will strip due process rights for migrants. Do you share that concern?
I think that, when I'm in a foreign country, like, I pay careful attention to following the law and making sure that violent criminals are not, there's not a safe harbor here. Like, that's not what we want. And I think that there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. It was not a perfect bill, but it's also really important that we are reflecting that, like, you don't get to, like, we don't want violent criminals here.
You're a Democrat, of course, but you're not afraid to vote with Republicans at times. What's it like to be under fire from both sides of the aisle?
Well, I believe in the votes that I'm taking, and I'm confident in defending them. We don't see perfect legislation coming down to the floor. I'm in the minority 3 times over, between the House, the Senate, and the executive branch. And so it's difficult to have as much influence as I'd like in what comes to the floor. But, I mean, my community is, I don't know many people who are going to, like, have Democrat or Republican carved on their gravestone. Like, partisanship is not how our community self-identifies. And it's also true that this district was drawn to be a Republican seat. Trump won this seat 3 times over. And now more than ever, I think it's really critical that we are building a definition of community and identity outside of this partisan gridlock. And it does feel, I wish that more of my colleagues were willing to evaluate a bill on its merits and work to make a bill better and find more shared common ground. But right now, you work where you live, right? Like, it is about building community and about taking this vice grip off of ourselves where we're just shoehorned into one corner or the other.
Recent CNN polls show 29% of those who participated have a favorable opinion of the Democratic Party. What does your party need to do to turn those numbers around?
Well, I think a lot of Americans feel like a lot of the stuff is just, it is going over, it's not for us, it's about, squeezing everyone further apart. And I think both parties really need to put some actual work into respecting the trades, substantive reform, things that, right to repair legislation, owner-builder permitting reform for single-family housing, ensuring that people running a daycare can peel a banana without having their license revoked. Like, there's been so much lip service and purported respect for the working class in our country, but it feels like lip service. It doesn't feel real. And I think going back to a real system of a representative body where you are representing your community, you are not there to represent a partisan ideology or importing some kind of checklist from somewhere else, but saying, like, we really care about European green crab. We really care about flooding in the Chehalis River Valley. We really care about the BPA. We care about having family farms. We care about our SHOP programs. We want to be able to build single-family housing in our community again. We want to own homes. Like, I think getting out of kind of virtue signaling and partisanship and getting to a system where we are loyal to the soil.
Welcome back to the program, everybody. I'm sitting across from Democrat Congresswoman Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez. We're sitting in her district office in Vancouver, continuing our discussion now. And I just teased the I-5 bridge. I know a lot of people concerned about that. The replacement critical to both Oregon and Washington. How much federal funding is needed for a new bridge to be built there? And do you see that happening with the federal cuts taking place? Give me your thoughts on that.
Well, right now there's no indication that there's a permanent hold or anything like that. Any evidence that it's more than the administration just taking a careful look at resources that have been allocated. I fought tooth and nail to bring back $2.1 billion for the bridge. And it is, I hear repeatedly, like, it is so vital to all of our small businesses, to all the folks who commute back and forth. No matter where you live in the district, a lot of folks where I live cross that bridge every day, and it is not an option to let that bridge collapse.
You belong to the House Blue Dog Coalition, made up of fiscally responsible Democrats. As part of that coalition, you wrote letters about the need for Congress to respect and prioritize rural communities. Why was that important to you?
Well, I think there's it's like you fix and support the things that are hurting rural communities, and you fix the country. We've taken a back seat, it feels like, for a lot of federal policies. A lot of the bills I see coming down the floor, they're written by people who have never had to travel more than 15 minutes to a hospital, or who have always had access to public transit, or who don't face wildfires. And I think when you come to things with a loyalty to the thing itself, when you are loyal to the Gifford Pinchot, and it's not about an abstraction of environmentalism, but to first principles of the woods itself, warts and all. And if I can get my colleagues to do that, we arrive at much better federal policy when it's about the thing itself in our communities and not an abstraction of it that's been commodified into like a football.
Number one thing you're working on for your district right now, what would that be?
There's a lot.
It's okay.
But I think it is working to have what is worth having, right? It is not just about cheap goods. We don't just want cheap crap. We want to have time with our families. We want to be able to not work 3 jobs, right? So there's a lot of strings to pull to get there. whether it is the regulatory reform of what it takes to run a business in this country. I hear from farmers all the time how much time they have to spend doing paperwork, or teachers, same thing. Small business owners, same thing. It is about returning pride, and dignity and agency to folks in work boots, right to repair legislation. It's not just about the trades, it's about respect for who we are as a country, and a sort of authorization of the idea that, like, you don't need to go to college to raise a family and own a home and be respected and useful to your community. You can do that in a million ways. We all have something to contribute to this economy and to our communities.
You live in Skamania County with your family, of course. I was looking at the Chamber of Commerce website. You notice that Sasquatch sightings figure prominently on that particular page. There's even an ordinance in place to protect Sasquatch. Visitors can look for them, but they can't hunt them. So I have the question here. If I were to come to Skamania County to see Sasquatch, what are the chances of that actually happening?
Well, if you leave your phone at home, they're much higher.
That's part of the deal?
Yeah.
Really?
So there's a place, people have really good stories, actually. Like, go to a bar in Skamania County, go to the Eagles in Skamania County, you'll hear some really good stories about sightings. But so we have a lot of lava flows, lava lakes. There's enough iron in the soil and in the rocks that compasses don't work, they'll jump around. That's a great place to start.
So you believe that Sasquatch is actually out there?
Prove that he's not, Steve.
I'm not sure I can do that. Hey, thank you for your time today. We appreciate you taking so much time with us. I know you're very, very busy. I'm glad we came out and met your lovely dog as well. So appreciate the time.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure.